Every state has a version of itself that it sells to the rest of the country. Texas sells highways, ranches, pickup trucks, and an unshakable sense of its own importance. But scattered across the state are 7 towns that seem to have missed that memo entirely. They don't fit the version of Texas you were sold. Some of them don't even fully make sense as places that should exist. And yet, somehow, they all survived. This is what happened to them and why none of them are quite what you'd expect. Marfa, Texas. Here is the single strangest fact about Marfa, a town of fewer than 1,700 people sitting in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert, 3 hours from El Paso with almost nothing in between, became one of the most talked about contemporary art destinations in the United States. Not in a quirky small town with a mural kind of way, in a people fly in from New York and Berlin specifically to be here kind of way. It started in the 1970s when minimalist sculptor Donald Judd moved to Marfa and decided that West Texas was the right place for serious art. He converted a former military base into the Chinati Foundation, a sprawling museum where 100 identical aluminum boxes sit in a row inside 2 aircraft hangars, each one worth more than most houses in the surrounding county. Other artists followed. Old military buildings became galleries, warehouses became exhibition spaces, luxury hotels opened on streets that look like they haven't changed since the 1940s. 30 minutes outside of town, on a stretch of Highway 90 where nothing else exists for miles, sits Prada Marfa, a permanent art installation built to look exactly like a Prada boutique. It has no employees. It sells nothing. It simply stands in the desert, confusing passing drivers since 2005. That's a reasonable summary of Marfa as a whole. Then there are the Marfa lights, unexplained glowing orbs that have been reported in the night sky east of town since 1883. Scientists have proposed atmospheric refraction, distant headlights, and several other explanations. None of them have fully closed the case. The town built a dedicated viewing platform for the lights, free of charge, which is genuinely the most surprising thing about the entire destination. The ranchers who founded this town as a railroad water stop in the 1880s would probably have a lot of questions. Jefferson, Texas. Jefferson didn't get left behind by history. It looked at history moving forward, decided things were already fine where they were, and told history to go around. This happened around 1875. The town has been on the porch of the 19th century ever since, deeply unbothered. Before the Civil War, Jefferson was a thriving river port, one of the busiest commercial centers in Texas. Steamboats from New Orleans and Shreveport traveled up the Red River system, navigated through a series of bayous, and arrived in Jefferson carrying goods and wealthy travelers. At its peak, Jefferson was larger than Dallas. Then engineers cleared a massive log jam in the Red River, known as the Great Raft. The water levels around Jefferson dropped, some accounts say by as much as 12 feet. Steamboats could no longer navigate into town. Trade collapsed. The railroads bypassed the area. Jefferson faded into the pine forests of East Texas and never came back out. But the buildings stayed. The Excelsior House Hotel has been operating continuously since the 1850s, 5 years after Texas became a state. Antebellum homes still line the streets. Victorian storefronts still face each other across downtown. None of it was preserved for tourists. It just never got torn down. What separates Jefferson from other well-preserved historic towns is its complete commitment to ghosts. This is not a town with one spooky bed and breakfast and a seasonal Halloween event. Jefferson has organized its entire tourism economy around the premise that the dead have simply not left. Multiple competing ghost tour companies run every night, which raises interesting questions about the afterlife's relationship with brand loyalty. If you've ever watched a ghost hunting show, there's a good chance you've already seen Jefferson. Jefferson doesn't just preserve its past, it lives inside it. And somehow, after a while, that stops feeling like an affectation and starts feeling entirely appropriate. Luckenbach, Texas. Luckenbach's official inventory is as follows: 1 general store, 1 dance hall, a few weathered buildings under some oak trees, and 3 chickens that answer to absolutely no one. The population is listed somewhere between 3 and 25 people, depending on the day. It sits 13 miles from Fredericksburg on a road that's not on most people's routes to anywhere. By any conventional measure, Luckenbach should be forgettable. It is not forgettable. People drive from Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston to spend an afternoon here doing essentially nothing. Sitting outside with strangers, listening to someone play guitar, drinking a cold beer in the shade while the afternoon heat slowly fades. Waylon Jennings wrote a song about this place. What he was actually writing about was a feeling that briefly had an address. The town became a cultural touchstone for outlaw country music in the 1970s, adopted by Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings as a symbol of a slower, more independent version of Texas life. Decades later, that identity hasn't shifted. There is no cell service worth mentioning. There are no major attractions. There is a dog sleeping in the middle of wherever you're trying to walk, and nobody is moving it. You think you're stopping in for a beer. You are not just stopping in for a beer. Nobody has ever just stopped in for a beer in Luckenbach, Texas. The place has done this thousands of times, and it knows exactly what it's doing to you. Uncertain Texas. Most towns pick a name that projects something geographic, significance, historical pride, frontier confidence. Uncertain, Texas looked at that tradition and declined. The story goes that nobody could agree on where the town boundaries actually were. Early settlers and officials weren't entirely sure whether certain land belonged to Texas or Louisiana. Steamboat captains navigating Big Cypress Bayou, the same route that once connected this area to the port at Jefferson, weren't always certain they could dock there on a given day. At some point, someone wrote uncertain on the paperwork. Everyone apparently shrugged, and the name stayed. It is either the most honest act of municipal naming in American history or a catastrophic failure of civic administration. Possibly both. The town sits on Caddo Lake near the Texas-Louisiana border with a permanent population of fewer than 100 people. The lake itself doesn't look like Texas. Ancient bald cypress trees grow directly out of the black water, their roots tangled beneath the surface while Spanish moss hangs from the branches overhead. Herons stand motionless at the water's edge, as if they're being paid for it. There are alligators. The rental kayak operators will mention this casually, in the same tone they use to mention the life jackets. Caddo Lake operates at a pace that feels biological, rather than chosen slow in the way that old water is slow, unhurried, in a way that has nothing to do with relaxation and everything to do with the fact that nothing out here is particularly interested in your schedule. For a town that could never quite get its story straight, it tells a pretty good one. Dublin, Texas. Dublin, Texas population around 3,500 had one thing that no other place on earth had. The oldest Dr. Pepper bottling plant still using the original formula, still sweetened with real cane sugar, still producing a soft drink so noticeably superior to the modern corporate version that people drove hours out of their way specifically to buy a case of it. Dublin Dr. Pepper wasn't a novelty or a regional curiosity. It was genuinely better, the kind of better that ruins you for the regular version, the kind of better that makes you pick up a gas station, Dr. Pepper, take one sip, and set it down in quiet grief. The plant had been doing this the right way since 1891. Then the Dr. Pepper Snapple Group noticed that Dublin was selling its product outside its licensed distribution territory. In 2012, the corporation sued the bottling plant into submission. 121 years of continuous operation ended by a territorial dispute over soft drink sales zones. The corporation won in court. Dublin responded by opening a new operation called Dublin Soda Works, continuing to make cane sugar sodas under a different name, which is the small town equivalent of getting knocked down and standing back up while maintaining direct eye contact. Today, there is a Dr. Pepper Museum. There are locals who will tell you the entire saga, unprompted, with a level of detail and emotional investment that makes it clear this was never really about soda. It was about whether a small town could still make something its own way, on its own terms, without eventually being absorbed by a system that finds that kind of independence inconvenient. Dublin lost the lawsuit, but nobody who ever tasted the original product forgot what it tasted like, and no legal settlement has ever successfully made people forget a better version of something they love. Wimberley, Texas. Wimberley sits at the confluence of Cypress Creek and the Blanco River in the Texas Hill Country, about an hour from both Austin and San Antonio. Here is what consistently happens to people who visit. They arrive as normal people with normal jobs and normal life plans. They leave 3 days later having priced out 2 acres on the edge of town, bookmarked several pottery classes, and developed a strong and previously non-existent opinion about the importance of a front porch. Nobody warns you. Wimberley doesn't need to warn you. It has done this thousands of times, and it knows exactly what it's doing. The town has always attracted artists, musicians, craftspeople, retirees, and people who wanted to step back from city life without disappearing entirely. Over time, That mix created a place where things are made by hand, not as a hobby or a brand, but as an actual philosophy. The Saturday market contains more handmade ceramic mugs, original watercolors, hand-poured candles, and homemade hot sauces than any rational market analysis would suggest is sustainable. Every single vendor appears to be doing fine spiritually, if not always financially. There is a man selling wind chimes made from reclaimed farm equipment. He is completely serious about his wind chimes. Crystals are sold next to barbecue restaurants. This is simply how Wimberley is. Then there is Jacob's Well. On the surface, it's a natural swimming hole fed by an underground spring, clear water, warm Texas sun, limestone rock, an impossibly blue color that doesn't look like it belongs in the state of Texas. People swim there in the summer. Beneath the surface, Jacob's Well is one of the deepest underwater cave systems in Texas, descending vertically into darkness. Divers have been exploring it for decades. Several have not returned. Standing at the edge, you feel two things simultaneously: peace and something harder to name. That tension is Wimberley in a sentence. Everything about the place feels gentle and slow and easy until you notice the thing underneath that isn't. Terlingua, Texas. Terlingua is officially classified as a ghost town. The problem is that people keep showing up anyway with luggage, with purpose, from Houston and Dallas and places with functioning cell service and reliable grocery stores. The original town existed because of cinnabar mining, the ore used to produce mercury. Companies came to the desert in the early 1900s, built a rough community of workers and temporary structures, extracted everything they could find, and left in the 1940s. By every reasonable measure, Terlingua should have quietly disappeared along with them. Instead, over the following decades, artists, drifters, retirees, survivalists, and people who drove to Big Bend National Park and simply never went back home began to accumulate. Nobody planned it. There was no development deal, no tourism strategy. People just kept stopping here. The result is a town that looks assembled rather than built, old mining ruins beside bars, trailers beside handmade houses, things that appear abandoned until you realize someone actually lives there. Every evening at sunset, something unusual happens. People gather at the cemetery. They sit near the graves with cold beers, watching the light die over the mountains, while music drifts through the desert air. It sounds strange. After about 40 minutes in Terlingua, it stops sounding strange at all. If Marfa rescued itself through art, Terlingua rescued itself through sheer stubbornness. It simply refused to become a normal ghost town, and eventually the world noticed.